Hello and welcome to Wally Gisnep's Top 10s, the series where we put together our own top 10s on various categories for Walt Disney films. My name's Ben and joining me as always is my good friend Liam. Liam, what are we looking at this time?
This time, Ben, we are taking a look at our top 10 personal favourite Disney animated classic Sidekicks. Now, when you proposed this, I was like, this is a great idea. And then I started making my list and I was like, I have no idea what technically counts as a sidekick. And I think immediately we may have stumbled onto our most controversial discussion so far, because there are going to be some characters that aren't on this list. And I think my reasoning, at least, is they technically aren't a sidekick.
I'm glad you've raised this early, Liam, because, we didn't agree in advance what definition we were going to use. So I'll give my broad definition, and that is a character who is always alongside another more significant character, and are always kind of defined by their relationship with them. So, for example, Captain Hook isn't the main character in Peter Pan, but I consider Smee a sidekick, because Smee is always with Captain Hook, right? But I wouldn't consider any of the Darling children to be sidekicks, because they are characters in their own right and aren't just a side character to Peter Pan.
I took it a step further, and weirdly enough, it was based on what you said to me when I asked this question, which is that they can't have their own character arc. They are defined exclusively by their relationship to another more prominent character, and they themselves don't. Yeah, this is where the list is going to get controversial. The genie's not on the list. That's what we're trying to get at. So save your angry comments. He's not on the list because he's not a sidekick.
Well, with that then, let's dive into number 10. So I'll start with my number 10, which is a choice so left field, I think it's entirely possible, Liam, when you made your list for consideration, you didn't even consider this character, but I've gone for Eminrude from The Rescuers.
You're right, I didn't think about Eminrude at all.
So, for those who don't remember, which I suspect is quite a few people, Eminrude is a dragonfly who lives in a bayou he's kind of a little ferryman type character. He doesn't have any dialogue, he just makes buzzing noises, but I think he's quite adorable. He's got a surprising amount of screen time for a dragonfly boatman who can't talk. He has a little thing where he gets chased by bats, and at the end he's got his winter clothing on. He's going on into another adventure with Bianca and Bernard, and then is never seen again or mentioned in The Rescuers Down Under.
In his defence, dragonflies have a very short lifespan, so I imagine by the start of Rescuers Down Under, he has died.
Well, one sidekick down, one dead. That's a good start to the podcast.
For my number 10, I sort of thought, right, what is the most atypical Disney sidekick that I think is good, but doesn't really offer anything new or bring much to the plate? And to me, I'm starting with Abu. I think Abu really sums up what it means to be a Disney sidekick. He is exclusively defined by his relationship to Aladdin, but despite that, so much personality comes through with all of his physicality. I think this is, we always say about like, what's great about animation is bringing to life the impossible, and you can give this voiceless monkey so much personality just based on his mannerisms and his facial expressions, but he doesn't really do too much in the film. I know he causes the kind of collapse of the Cave of Wonders, and there's a few, stealing of he does quite a lot. What am I talking about? But the point is Abu to me is the atypical Disney sidekick, but outside of that doesn't really offer much more. But I do really like Abu, which is why, he's just snuck into my top 10.
Now what's interesting is we've both gone for characters that don't speak, or certainly don't speak a human language, as our number 10 choices. I'll be interested to see if we have more non-verbal and verbal characters in this list. My number 9 is Archimedes from The Sword and the Stone, who is a grumbly owl. It's a weird dynamic with Merlin, because it's not like one of them's grumpy and one of them isn't. They're both grumpy and patronising. I like Archimedes. I like that he kind of cuts through the nonsense that sometimes floats about in that film. It's like, no, come on, let's just sort things out.
My number 9 is probably one of the more controversial additions to my list, but I really wanted something like this and really this example on the list, because I'm actually going to go for the crew of the Ulysses from Atlantis: The Lost Empire, and I don't really know if I can call them sidekicks, because they do technically have that arc where it's revealed that they're just in it for the money, and then by the end of the film they're siding with Milo, but They're just this wonderful cast of characters, and I think they're maybe Disney's best example of a cast of characters. I know I've talked recently about the Family Madrigal in Encanto, but I feel they are more of protagonists themselves, whereas the crew of the Ulysses, to me, are what I want when I see a cast. It's similar, like I was thinking about maybe the team from Big Hero 6, but I don't really think they would count as side characters. What is a colourful cast of characters that are still just side characters, and I don't think Disney have yet beaten that with the crew of the Ulysses.
Liam, I hate to say it, but I feel you've already broken your own rule, because you said side characters can't have a character arc, and then you immediately described them as saying they start the film, they're just in it for the money, and by the end they've decided to do the right thing and side with Milo.
Ben, if there's one thing you need to know about my top 10s, it's that I'm going to be breaking my own rules constantly.
My number 8 is probably no surprise to people who listen to this podcast regularly, because it's a character from Robin Hood, and it's Little John, aka Brown Baloo.
My number 8 is also Little John.
That's excellent, particularly since the first list we did of these, we both had the same number 8 as well. Why do you like Little John, Liam?
It's mostly because of Phil Harris, and I was like, right, which Phil Harris performance am I including? And it felt weird to include Little John over Baloo, but I feel Little John is more of a side character than Baloo.
I was torn on Baloo, but I don't think you can say Baloo is a sidekick. I think he has his own character arc. It's not a complex character arc, but he has one of, learning to kind of take things more seriously and act a bit more selflessly. And yeah, I think he's way more intrinsic. I think Jungle Book doesn't really use the same character tropes as a lot of Disney films do, but yeah, Little John, he is almost the archetypal sidekick of he's the guy who's behind Robin Hood.
But also there are whole scenes that he just carries, like the sequence at the archery contest where he is kind of swindling Prince John is so good and is just carried by Phil Harris's performance that, like, this is what I want from my side characters.
As far as I know, a lot of that was ad-libbed or certainly developed by Phil Harris as well, which is a really nice touch. My number 7 choice then is also a Disney regular who brings a lot to their roles. I don't know how much they were able to bring to this role, and it's Hey Hey from Moana.
When I was putting this list together, I asked my friend and she was like, oh, you included the chicken from Moana? And I was like, no. Apparently I'm in the minority here.
I didn't think Hey Hey would make the cut, but I was like, there's just something about Hey Hey that's very funny. And I think partly it's the thing of, like, Hey Hey's almost an oblivious sidekick in that Moana doesn't want him as a sidekick. She certainly didn't choose him as one. And Hey Hey very much isn't aware that he's Moana's sidekick. But it just works. Like, there's some really nice visual comedy. I like that Hey Hey is sort of plot relevant in a much more anarchic way than Abu, perhaps. But yeah, I think there's just something very appealing about it. Puo, her little pig friend, is very cute, and I think is set up to be the sidekick. Like, in the first 10 minutes of the film, you're like, oh, Puo's going to be the little friend who goes on the adventure. It's like, nope, you get the stupid chicken.
Hey Hey is one of those few revival moments that I really enjoy where it is very much a send-up of the Disney animal sidekick. I hate that they reference it so explicitly, but to just have just a completely stupid animal along for the ride, I admit is very charming. My number 7 is Kronk. For very similar reasons to your Hey Hey, in that I just find Kronk so endearing and charming, and is one of the highlights of The Emperor's New Groove that I just couldn't not include Kronk in a list of sidekicks.
I think he must be the only sidekick who gets his own spin-off film, unless I'm misremembering. I know one of the Ugly Sisters from Cinderella got a spin-off, but I wouldn't really call her a sidekick as much as a sort of secondary antagonist. So yeah, I think Kronk's New Groove has a special place in the Disney canon. Well, my number 6, I am going to Aladdin, but I've gone for Carpet, who I think is really interesting. And the reason I think Carpet's such a good sidekick is because Carpet's completely non-verbal and doesn't even have facial expressions, but they manage to convey so much emotion and charm and character onto, well, a carpet. And it works so well, like, you really, really warm to Carpet incredibly quickly. And also, just at a technical level, the way that patterning is done, that sort of blend of CGI and hand-drawn animation, and the movement and flow of it is so good. Again, they get so much visual material out of Carpet throughout that film. So yeah, I love Carpet.
Absolutely, and I feel that Carpet is still maybe the best example of, as you say, like a side character that doesn't have features or a face to go off, and being able to convey emotions and character without facial features is something that Disney's been leaning a lot more into recently, like we were talking about in our Encanto discussion of Casita. But I think Carpet is the original, is still probably the best so far. I'm going old school with my number 6, and it was a choice between two. I couldn't really decide between Jiminy Cricket or Timothy Q. Mouse, and then I realised that I do find Timothy Q. Mouse quite annoying, so I've gone for Jiminy Cricket. I wonder how much of this came from the Kingdom Hearts games, because for some bizarre reason, Jiminy Cricket is with you for all 400 hours of that series. And maybe I've just grown quite fond of him through that. Disney themselves are very fond of Jiminy Cricket. I think, maybe it's because they gave him the song that they absolutely used to death. But I think this weird little green man is probably the earliest example of a really effective sidekick. And again, just works so well within the narrative to me.
Whenever you link one of these things back to Kingdom Hearts, it's always 50-50 whether you're going to say, it really made me love this thing, or it really made me hate this thing. Like, when I talked about my favourite scene in Tangled, which is the market dance sequences, and you were just like, oh yeah, there's a horrible mini-game in Kingdom Hearts, so I hate this now. I think it takes Disney a long time to stop doing characters that are versions of Jiminy Cricket, and I also like his role as a narrator, which we don't get a lot of, where we have in-universe characters narrating. Like, obviously Flynn Rider does it, the Gospels in Hercules do it, there's some other examples, but it's pretty rare. I've got a lot of time for Jiminy.
I will say I am specifically referring to Jiminy Cricket in Pinocchio, not Jiminy Cricket in Fun and Fancy 3, I think, yeah, where he sort of just breaks into someone's house.
Well, he breaks into someone's house in Pinocchio, Liam.
Oh, yeah. But the other problem is in Fun and Fancy 3, he breaks into a house and sees the world's creepiest party happening.
We've talked about how he breaks into a house in both films. He also breaks into a house that's full of creepy, humanised dolls. Very much his modus operandi, isn't it?
And at no point in Kingdom Hearts does he break into a house. I'm furious. It would have been useful at several points.
Moving into the top 5 then, my number 5, and this is one that, again, before going into this list, I don't think I would have assumed it, but then when I wrote them all out and started thinking about it, I think it's actually a really great sidekick, and that's Ray from The Princess and the Frog. The little firefly from the bayou. Why do I just like insects in bayous? All that says about me. But what I like about him is when he first turns up, I find him quite annoying, and then by the end of the film, I love him. I don't think that's an arc. Like, he's just quite a selfless character, and then like he has like a little sad moment, and he dies quite tragically at the hands of Facilier. In a film that's got way too many different side characters and side plots, I think Ray's the one that shines.
I do really like Ray. He probably didn't quite make my top 10. I think probably just because the issues I kind of have with The Princess and the Frog in general. But, now you say it, I do think it's one of my favourite Jim Cummings performances, which is saying a lot because that man has been in everything. Second only to the Master. Well, one of the several Master voices in the original Fallout.
Ah, so good. Can we do a top... No, we can't do any Fallout top 10s. This is a Disney Channel.
My number 5, this might be up for debate, but I've hedged my bets a little bit here. I'm going for Archimedes, but I am also going for the complete duo, and I'm saying it's Merlin and Archimedes. Now, I'm happy to say it's just Archimedes, but if you'll allow it, I'm going to say that Merlin and Archimedes is just such a great pair that they together form just a great sidekick to Arthur.
Ooh, I don't know about this, Liam. I can see the case for Merlin being a sidekick in much the same way that, classically, Little John is Robin's sidekick and Merlin is Arthur's sidekick in the Legends of King Arthur. But I don't know if having a sidekick and a sidekick is going to fly, so I might have to push you to choose one.
If I have to choose one, it's going to be Merlin, but the problem is I just can't separate this bickering married couple in the form of Merlin and Archimedes, and I think they work so well together and are just a complete package. I think so much of the humour of that film derives from their interacting, and we've got the wonderful part where they break up and go their separate ways, and Archimedes decides to teach Arthur. I really like them together, and if you'll allow it, I'm going to stick them together. If I have to pick, though, it's technically Merlin.
I'll let the comments thrash out how much you're taking the mick here. I don't want to set a dangerous precedent here, but I will accept Archimedes and Merlin for now as your number 5.
At the very least, he's the closest thing we're getting to putting the genie on the list.
My number 4, I've also gone old school, Liam, but I went the other side of the coin, and I went for Timothy Q. Mouse. And they're quite similar characters, as you say, and I can definitely see the case for Jiminy Cricket. Obviously, he did it first. The reason I like Timothy Q. Mouse so much is I feel a lot of what Jiminy says is kind of... A lot of his bits, he's just kind of faffing about in scenes, and sometimes he's talking to Pinocchio, sometimes he's talking to the audience. And I feel it was a thing of Walt Disney being like, this story just needs a direct connection, particularly for children. But the reason I particularly like Timothy is I like how much emotion he gives to the film. So he's the voice of Dumbo because we're watching all this injustice happen and he's the character who speaks up for it. And when I was editing one of our videos the other day, I was getting some screenshots from the sequence of the crows, and just the bit where he stands up to them and says, "Go ahead, laugh." Dumbo's had everyone laugh at him. It's just really sweet, and it really made me care about Timothy and think Timothy's a good guy, even if he makes millions out of it in the long run.
Well, you've made me feel bad about relegating him to the honourable mentions in favour of Jiminy Cricket. I think you've made a really good case for Timothy Q. Mouse. I think most of it for me is I just find the voice a little bit irritating.
I can see that, yeah, for sure. But then again, I find Jiminy's a bit annoying as well, especially his weird singing voice.
Going from irritating voices to arguably the best voice in all of Disney, my number 4 is Sebastian, who, one thing I absolutely love about Sebastian is he's not technically Ariel's sidekick, he's Triton's sidekick, and he's just kind of keeping tabs on Ariel.
Full disclosure, Liam, my number 3 is Sebastian as well, so I'm very likely to agree with everything you're about to say.
I absolutely love him, and when I first pitched this list, I was thinking, can I get Sebastian at number 1? Because I really feel like he was the first one that came to mind, but there's just others that just beat him to it. And I'm surprised he ended as low as 4 for me, because I really love him. I mean, he's the source of so much of the music of the film. He's got so much personality. It's weird. The older I get, the more I relate to him, and he's just a very anxious and stressed character having to deal with the plot of this film. And I absolutely love him.
I think one of the reasons he works is, functionally, The Little Mermaid as a story is about Ariel's relationship with her father. And Ariel and Triton don't get that many scenes together, but with Sebastian, it means we can have the presence and the reminder of Triton there at all times, whilst also having the story focus on Ariel, which I think works really, really well. And as Sebastian softens to her and sees her perspective, it helps feed into Triton's change of heart at the end of the film. Whereas I think if you didn't have Sebastian and Triton just goes, "Oh well, I guess I'll give her what she wants," it wouldn't really make any sense, or it would just feel like a real U-turn. Also, as you say, he gives us Under the Sea and Kiss the Girl, which are 2 of the biggest Disney bangers of all time.
My number 3, and part of me felt a bit reluctant to call this character a sidekick, but that's absolutely what they are. My number 3 is Baymax, who I've said before is probably the Disney character that I find the most adorable. And Baymax is just so charming. And in terms of, having their own arc, Baymax's whole purpose is to get Hero through his arc. That's the definition, really, of a sidekick, is to support that character through what they're doing and what they're going through. And I think few Disney characters achieve that as well as Baymax.
I think I love Baymax more than any other character on my list, but I haven't put them on my list because I didn't feel they fell into my definition of a sidekick. That said, I do think Baymax is superb in terms of design and just so goddamn lovable. But it also makes me question, Liam, if you have put Baymax on your list, what the hell is above Baymax? So my number 2, and I think this might surprise you, is Iago from Aladdin.
Well, my number 2 is also Iago.
Hey! 2 in 1 list.
So to answer your question, who the hell have I put above Baymax? The answer is Gilbert Gottfried.
When you started introducing Sebastian and said one of the best voices in Disney, I was like, has he put Iago at number 4? So I think the Iago-Jafar dynamic is so good. It'd be very easy to have it the other way around, where you have a big, crazy bad guy and his sidekick is a sort of conniving, weaselly little plotter. But having it the other way around and like a parrot that's just a little bird but is incredibly aggressive works really well. And like Gilbert Gottfried is such an inspired choice because like the whole thing of a parrot is like it can imitate stuff, and his is just like, no, I've got an abrasive voice that sounds like nothing on earth.
What put Iago so high for me is it goes beyond being defined by their relationship to another character and went into, I can't think of the other character, Jafar, without thinking of Iago. They are just a complete package. And if that doesn't scream a successful sidekick, I don't know what else could.
Before we give our number one slots then on what we think is the best Disney sidekick, let's give a few honourable mentions. So mine are, we've already talked about Jiminy Cricket. I really like Charlie from The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Esmeralda's little goat friend. It doesn't really do a huge amount, so I didn't make the list, but I think he's pretty adorable. And again, I love him and Esmeralda as a duo. Mr. Smee was my example, which I gave earlier, which again, I don't love Mr. Smee, but he is inseparable from Hook.
Yeah, for my honourable mentions, I was like, pretty much anyone in Peter Pan is a pretty good sidekick. Like Tinkerbell is often considered like one of the most popular sidekicks. I think aside from Wendy, the other children, both her siblings and the Lost Boys, I just consider sort of sidekick territory. And I think they're all very good at it. They're just not top 10 potential. Smee, on the other hand, I think maybe could have squeezed in if I was being a bit more strict on my definition for some of these. On top of that, like some that I wasn't too sure about, I was wondering about the three fairies from Sleeping Beauty. I think they're maybe too integral to the story by themselves, as opposed to their relationship to the other characters to be considered sidekicks. Obviously, we can't forget Zini, the monkey from Dinosaur.
I mean, obviously I did forget Zini. Even when you said the name, I was like, I don't know who this is.
And there's sort of a personal controversy. I didn't include Maximus, and I think that's because Maximus wouldn't have made the number one spot, and so I'm saving Maximus for our top 10 Disney horses, where he will absolutely make the number one spot.
There's definitely some controversial exclusions here. I know some popular ones like Mushu, Timon and Pumbaa, as you say, Tinkerbell. They've certainly not made my top 10, and at most one of them has made your top 10.
I wasn't sure if Timon and Pumbaa were going to make your top 10. They've definitely not made mine, but I don't think that surprises anyone at this point. The thing I like the least about The Lion King, I think maybe the most controversial, and I don't know if it'd be your number one, but one I think people would expect to see is Olaf, who I can't get on board with Olaf. I know I'm in the minority. I know people absolutely love Olaf, but I just can't get on board with that character and that performance.
I mean, I don't dislike Sven. I always put Sven on the list, but not quite. The other two honourable mentions I quickly want to shout out are Pascal, Rapunzel's little chameleon friend, and Dawson from Basil the Great Mouse Detective, because again, another sort of literary classic of a hero and a sidekick, and I think Dawson is bumbling but lovable.
So with honourable mentions out of the way, I'm pretty sure we have the same number one spot.
Well, I know we don't, and I'll tell you why, Liam, because you've already used my number one, and I've gone for Kronk. So hear me out. The metric you've used is a character that's completely inseparable from the character to whom they are a sidekick. But I think with Kronk, there's more than that, because I think Kronk is undeniably a sidekick, but I also think he's the best thing in the film he's in. And I can't say that for any of these other characters. Like, I love Iago, but if you took Jafar away from that, what would I think about him? I think he's decent, but I don't know if I'd be like, I want loads of Iago. What I want is loads of Iago and Jafar. I love Kronk and Yzma, but I can take Kronk just cronking it up all day.
I mean, that exists. It's just anything with Patrick Warburton.
Well, you were very confident we've gone for the same thing, Liam, which makes me feel I've made a huge oversight, but put me out of my misery. Who is your number one Disney sidekick?
Well, now I'm worried that I've completely missed the point of this conversation and our definition of sidekick, because my number one is from your number one film. I'm going for Cogsworth and Lumiere, and really by extension just the whole cast of the Enchanted Castle. I think all of these characters, and let's just talk really about Lumiere and Cogsworth as this kind of duo that guide Belle through her journey. You need that humanity within the castle for this relationship between Belle and the Beast to work at all. Like, if it was just Belle and the Beast, the film wouldn't work. The relationship wouldn't build. They bring so much life and personality But what really cemented their number one spot to me is that there's something that works so well in animation, and it's what I always say animation is about bringing to life the otherwise impossible. And I know we've got CGI, but like we've got the remake of Beauty and the Beast, and those side characters don't work as well in the remake, whereas the animation behind all of these characters and just the personality it brings is one of my favourite elements about Beauty and the Beast.
So you don't have to convince me that Lumiere and Cogsworth are fantastic. I think the reason I excluded them was I didn't consider them to fall within the definition.
This is going to be the controversy of this video, isn't it?
Well, I put Evinrude in above Olaf, so I consider them a duo rather than sidekicks, and it's the same with Timon and Pumbaa in that I was trying to go for individual characters, but even if I was considering them as a pair, like, you know, you can say Timon and Pumbaa are Simba's sidekicks. I don't know who I'd say Lumiere and Cogsworth are sidekicks to, because sometimes they're sidekicks to Belle, sometimes they're sidekicks to the Beast.
That's what I love about them. They're the bridge between the two characters.
Don't get me wrong, I agree that they are the bridge between the characters, and I love them for it. I don't disagree with any of the praise you're laying on Lumiere and Cogsworth. In a very unexciting way, I've fallen down on a technicality. And if I've learned one thing, it's before we write our top 10s, agree on the definition.
Well, we've already written our lists for the next one, so I'm looking forward to seeing how we manage to wrangle the definition of an I Want song. As it turns out, When I See an Elephant Fly is technically an I Want song.
Don't start, Liam. So I guess then, looking at the aggregate totals, collectively, Wally Gisnep is saying that the best Disney sidekick is Aladdin's Iago.
Oh, there's a big surprise! That's an incredible... I think I'm gonna have a heart attack and die from that surprise!
It's interesting, isn't it, that not only both of our number twos, but your number ones were sidekicks to the villains instead. And with that then, that is our top 10 Disney sidekicks. Obviously, let us know your top 10s in the comments below, as well as your definition of a sidekick, because I feel this is the most important part of this video, really.
Everyone's going to say Genie now, aren't they? Now we've opened that can of worms.
He has his own character arc. It feels weird to say it.
So does Lumiere. He wants to get off with the sexy French duster, and he does.
But he didn't sing a song about it, so we can't mention that in our next video.
So once again, thank you so much for listening. Wally Gisnep is available on SoundCloud, Spotify, a selection of other podcast hosting platforms, as well as YouTube, where we post memes, interviews, edits, as well as video versions of our top 10s and our main podcast, Wally Gisnep's Animated Classics, where we go through classic animated films, deciding which ones are truly worthy of being called a classic. And Liam, as you mentioned, we've got another top 10 list coming up.
We do indeed. Our next list, we're going to be looking at our personal favourite top 10 I Want songs. Hopefully the definition is a bit clearer in this next video, but I've got to say this is one I'm really looking forward to. I mean, I look forward to all of them, but this in particular, I think this is what makes Disney Disney. So I'm very excited to see where we land on our top 10 I Want songs. And with that, all that's left to say is thank you once again for listening. We really do appreciate it. And remember to join us next time for another top 10 from Wally Gisnep.